When I was 6 years old, I had a grand total of 0 friends in first grade. Now, I realized that this was a difficult situation, so I waited until about 3 weeks in when I finally found my opportunity, a transfer student. She had just moved from Florida to Auburn, Alabama, and I knew this was my chance. Her name was Nicole, and during her first day at recess, I approached her with the most important question I would ask her. Would you like to race to that big tree? That was back in the day when I still liked running and before I had a leg injury. And lucky for me, she said yes. We made it to the tree around the same time. And when we got there, I asked her the second most important question. Would you be my best friend? Again, she said yes. It was a simpler time. Now, Nicole and I had a great friendship. For 6 weeks, there were no issues. We would play Space Time Machine, a game where we would slide down and pretend we were in a different part of the world during a different era. But one day during recess, I left her for just a moment. And when I came back, she was surrounded by the kids in our class. I couldn't quite make out what they were saying to her, though. But the closer I got, I started to hear her voice. Nicole kept saying, "No, he's my friend. I won't stop being his friend." By that point, I could hear what the other kids were saying. They were yelling at her, "If you continue being his friend, you'll burn in hell too." That was the first time in my life that I realized that being Muslim was going to make other people perceive me as different. At that point in my life, I was unaware about the greater notion of anti-Muslim sentiment, or how that falls into the umbrella term, Islamophobia. And neither was Nicole. Nicole didn't know a lot about Islamophobia or Islam. Heck, I didn't know a lot about Islam. I was 6. But Nicole did know me. And because she had a relationship with me, she was willing to stand up for what she felt was right, regardless. Research shows that individuals who know a Muslim are more likely to have favorable views about Islam and its followers, Muslims. Unfortunately, research also shows that the majority of Americans do not know a Muslim or don't know one very well, therefore reinforcing the notion of anti-Muslim sentiment throughout. Now, I recognize that because so many individuals may not know a Muslim, that this could be an opportunity for me to introduce myself to all of you. My name is Omar, and hopefully throughout today's talk, you'll get a glimpse of my life and, by extension, my faith. Now, after first grade, the kids found other things to mock me about, so I had a solid 6 years where that wasn't really in the public sphere, until about 7th grade. That was the year 9/11 happened. Now, they say you'll never forget where you were that moment, and I haven't. But I also haven't forgotten the moments after 9/11 that same month, because the events of that month changed my entire life as an American and as a Muslim. It was second period health class in 7th grade when Alexis, one of my best friends, ran into the room telling me what had happened to the World Trade Center. I didn't believe him. But more than just that, I didn't understand. I didn't have an understanding of what it meant for our country to be under attack. I remember going home that day and seeing my mother on the couch crying and asking her what had happened. And then she said that our nation was in danger. I didn't have a reference for that. I was confused, and nothing in my life would have given me any context. And what happened next, I had even less context for. My dad came home, and he told us that for the next month, we probably shouldn't go out very much other than maybe work and school. I didn't understand what I had done. Were they worried about my safety? Why? Until the next day at school where it started to make more sense. As kids began yelling anti-American sentiments at me, saying I didn't love this country, or raising their hand and asking the teachers why we didn't just bomb the entire Middle East, a region of the world where the majority of my family still lives, it all became clearer. But I still didn't fully understand. I didn't fully understand why when we went to the supermarket, our first outing in 3 weeks, why the people we called our neighbors were glaring at me and my mother as we walked through the aisles. I didn't understand why my teachers always seemed in such a panic, and I didn't understand what was happening when I finally broke down to my father a few weeks later, asking him that this religion that I have come to hold so dear was being used for something I didn't understand or believe in. I told him about how the Muslims I knew growing up were individuals who helped us move into our new place, taught me at Sunday school, and were the coaches of my sports teams. Granted, that third one didn't work out so well, but that's not on them. And for me, Islam was a religion where if you had something to eat and your neighbor didn't, then you weren't considered a true believer. Or the taking of one innocent life was viewed as the taking of all innocent lives in humanity. And I couldn't fathom the fact that in the name of my religion, so many innocent lives had been taken. As I am breaking down telling my father this, he looked at me and told me that what I was saying and my idea of Islam was right. He explained to me how individuals with a negative political motive can take verses from a holy book out of context and use them for their own negative doings. With that conversation in mind, I started to be having a renewed sense of self and identity in regards to my faith. I was able to engage the world with that sense of self. Now, at 7th grade, I had maybe tripled my number of friends, which I think my parents realized was making me a bit too confident, so we moved the next year. I started 8th grade in College Station, Texas, and I signed up for a speech class as an elective. Now, in this speech class, every week we debate different issues. And for some reason, my 8th grade speech teacher, bless her heart, felt the need to have us debate foreign affairs. I don't know why she wanted to hear 8th graders' opinions on this, but she made the choice. The first student to raise his hand said that he believed that we should just bomb all Muslim countries, because in their holy book, it says that they should attack us. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is the moment where I rise from the ashes, give a beautiful speech, galvanize the masses. None of that happened. The teacher asked if there was a rebuttal, and I and everyone else in the class remained silent. I had just moved there. I hadn't had friends, and my slowly building sense of self was crumbling once again. Until that moment when she stepped in. She explained to the student how she had lived a portion of her life in the Middle East, how the Muslims she met were some of the most hospitable people she had ever known, and how for her, these Muslims were a representation of a beautiful faith, a faith that preaches peace and tolerance. I walked away from that speech class and immediately joined the speech team at my middle school. For 9 years, thanks to Ms. Harris, I competed in speech and debate, finding my voice and spending every free weekend with individuals who would volunteer their time to listen to me speak. Not unlike this. Now, I had finally built up my repertoire. I was about to enter high school. I had a sense of self, I had a voice, I had an identity, I had a friend. We were in good shape. I entered 9th grade, and I went and approached the principal to ask if I could perform one of my 5 mandatory prayers that started and ended during the school hours during school. Now, one of the important tenets of the Muslim faith is that of prayer. We pray 5 times a day during prescribed times. It's in order to ensure that we have a sense of self and a connection to God throughout the day. Now, I had been praying in school since 6th grade. I had never had any issues up until this point. When I asked the principal if I could pray in school, she said no. I then waited for her to say the word problem, but that never happened. It just ended at no. And I realized that for the first time in my life, a constitutional right of mine was being taken away due to an anti-Muslim sentiment. I went home to my parents and we discussed our options. We then reached out to a civil rights organization that, after a long litigation period, was able to win me and 12 other Muslim students the right to pray in school. Now, this right to pray in school was nothing terribly dramatic. All it takes is a small corner of a room during class, during the passing periods between class, and roughly 4 minutes to be able to perform a prayer. We even bring our own rugs, which at 5 years old was a huge disappointment when I found out they did not fly. Disney lied. Disney lies quite a bit, but that's not a different speech. Being part of that situation, I didn't realize at the time, was not terribly unique. After 9/11, the amount of discrimination in terms of civil rights infringements towards Muslim Americans was increasing at an alarming rate. Everything from employment discrimination to housing to hate crimes was consistently going up for Muslim Americans. Just last year, the Supreme Court ruled in EEOC v. Abercrombie and Fitch that a Muslim woman who applied for a job at Abercrombie and Fitch wearing a hijab and was discriminated against for wearing that religious attire was entitled to her position. Now, I was personally more of an American Eagle fan, but to each person, they can make their own choice. And the bigger issue is that this is not uncommon. And what's more worrisome is the fact that it doesn't just end with employment discrimination. 2015 was heralded as the worst year for Muslims yet, with civil rights infringements at an all-time high and safety concerns at a forefront. There have been multiple accounts in which Muslims have been harassed, attacked, and even murdered in their own homes. But for me, 2015 was when I was still in the first half of my law school experience. I was a little shut out from the outside world. I was trying to figure out, what is a contract? Is international law a real thing? Spoiler alert, I don't think it is. But that's how I was dedicating my time when all of a sudden, out of the blue, a professor of mine from Texas A&M sent me a message. She told me that she had heard of a politician saying that he was in support of internment camps for Muslims. Now, when I first got the message, I was a little surprised. She went on saying that if it ever got to that point, I would always have a place to stay with her and her family. It was sweet, but I was at first very taken aback. Like, we have not gotten to this point. We are jumping through a lot of things right now. What is a contract? Like, there was a lot going on. And at first, I kind of disregarded the message, sent her a polite thank you, and kept going with my day. But upon further reflection, I realized that this humorous example was not far from reality. And at the time of the 2016 political election and building up to that, politicians on both sides of the aisle have utilized fear-mongering to bring a base of individuals whose main priority is that of safety and have played on the notion of their fears. The target have been Muslim Americans throughout, with politicians making statements ranging from Muslims should not hold high office in this country to we should ban all Muslims from the US, including American ones. Now, at this point, I was starting to feel something I had never felt before: hopelessness. And when an individual who runs the Racial Justice Coalition at the University of Michigan Law School reached out to me to host a rally for peace, I said yes, but I didn't know if I had it in me, particularly when he asked me to be the main speaker. Up until the day of, the only thing I could think about was how I was going to have to tell the crowd about how hopeless I felt. And if any of you have ever been to a rally, hopelessness is not exactly a unifying cry. But it was the truth. I felt hopeless that a small group of individuals had hijacked my faith, and thereby implicating 1.7 billion Muslims in the process. Not to mention, the main number of individuals they had been killing at this point were Muslims. Hopeless when I felt like I was being blamed for the actions of those few individuals, and hopeless when I realized that domestic terrorism in this country since 9/11 has predominantly not been carried out by Muslims, but rather by neo-Nazi white men. But we weren't talking about that. Hopeless. Then the morning of the rally, I happened to read an article about a 7-year-old boy in Pflugerville, Texas. He had heard about a mosque in his community being vandalized and asked his mother to drive him there. Upon entering the mosque, he came in and gave the leaders of that establishment the entirety of his piggy bank. Because for him, although he didn't know a lot about Islam, he did know that his neighbors were suffering, and he wanted in some way to help. That story gave me hope. That story is what reminds me why for the last decade of my life I have been trying to build bridges, and how we all have a responsibility to do so. That story reminded me that we as individuals do best as a country when we come together regardless of identity. And that story is the reason I'm sitting here before you now. Because 1 week after reading that article, I received an email from TED Talk here at Abilene Christian University, asking me if I'd be willing to speak. And luckily, because I had that ounce of hope, I said yes. Now, reflecting on all of that hope I'm now having once again, and recognizing the responsibility I have to help bring individuals and communities together, I think it's important to share that we all have that responsibility. So I ask each of you to be a Nicole, to be an individual who stands in the face of hatred and fear-mongering and ensure that you're doing your part to make our society better. Now, that's not for me. At this point in my life, I have a really great support system of allies and individuals who are willing to be there regardless of anti-American sentiment. My friend base has grown significantly from the number of 1, and if you count my Facebook friends, it's much larger than that. And because of that, I actually feel like for the first time in my life, I have a support network of people. But that's not true for all Muslims in this country. That's not true for the woman who just immigrated to the US, who's wearing a hijab and doesn't feel safe on the train. That's not true for the 14-year-old girl who just started high school, and the only America she has known has been a post-9/11 one, where she has grown up afraid and feeling different. And that's not true for the 6-year-old boy who just started first grade and wants a friend. And you have the opportunity to make a difference in their lives. Whether that's talking to that kooky uncle we all somehow have every time he makes a comment that doesn't sit well with you, or correcting an individual on the bus when they spew some hate by utilizing your voice. Together, we can all make a huge difference, and you can be a Nicole. Thank you, and peace be with you.